behalf of the Department of Anesthesia, I now welcome our HOD to give a welcome address for the day.
Good morning to all. On behalf of the Department of Anesthesiology, it is my great pleasure to welcome our beloved Dean, Dr. Professor Shanmugam, Dean Annapurna Medical College, Salem. And also, it is my great pleasure to welcome our Superintendent, Medical Superintendent, Dr. Mohan, for this webinar. And also, I welcome our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Prasanna Babu. I welcome you, sir, for this participate in this webinar program. And also, it is a great pleasure to welcome our Vice Principal, Professor Dr. Usha Madam, for this webinar. And also, I am very great pleasure to invite our chief guest speaker, additional Professor Dr. Stalin Vinayagam, Jipmer Medical College, Pondicherry. I once again welcome you, sir, for this webinar. And also I welcome all the professors and HODs, assistant professors, and students, CRRI of Annapurna Medical College for attending the webinar. And thanks to once again and welcome all the participants. The topic is going to talk about the perioperative fluid management of the patient coming for the surgical procedures. It is a very important topic for the good outcome of the patient. Fluid management is not an easy. It varies from person to person and case to case, and the depends upon the conditions of the patients. So the patient recovery in the post-operative period mainly because of the intraoperative fluid management. I welcome you, sir, to speak about the perioperative fluid management.
Now I ask Dr. Raja to give an introduction of the speaker to the panel participants.
Yes, so very good morning to all on the dais and off the dais. Dr. Stalin Vinayagam, the guest speaker. So he is my friend, and he is now worked as an additional professor in the Department of Anesthesiology and Critical Care, Jipmer, Pondicherry. He finished MBBS in Chengalpattu Medical College, and he done his postgraduate in the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Medical College, Madhya Pradesh, Jabalpur, and he finished IDRE also. So now he is working in the Jipmer, Pondicherry, and his area of interest are regional anesthesia and pediatric anesthesia airway, and he published 27 papers in the international as well as national, and he written a chapter of the books, 3 chapters in the books, and he invited faculty as a national international conferences, and he is a age certified BLS ACLS instructor also. He is a reviewer of various national and international journals, and I am very glad to introduce as a guest speaker Dr. Stalin and hand over the mic to the Satish.
Now I ask our respected Dean to say a few words.
Good morning to everyone. First of all, I congratulate the Department of Anesthesia for arranging an important topic about this perioperative or intraoperative fluid management. Such an important topic, all the anesthetists and the pediatricians, all the doctors also should know about this perioperative management. Now, this aspect, other people may not know much except the anesthetist. Anesthetists only will know most of the perioperative management. But it is better for the surgeon also should know at the time of crisis, he will also contribute. Probably will contribute more in this perioperative management. We will also monitor. While doing surgery, we will monitor how much of fluid going, what is going in. Also, we will monitor simultaneously. Being a pediatric surgeon, I was involved in all these things also. Along with anesthetists, I work along with anesthetists. That that is why I am also interested in learning this perioperative medicine. What is the new thing is here? I thank the department for calling Mr. Stalin Vinayagam for this important topic. I congratulate them once again, and I think all the participants they benefit out of it. I welcome each and every one of you to take part. I don't want to take much of his time. Let us listen to his topic. What is going on? Thank you very much for giving an opportunity.
So now I welcome Dr. Stalin to start the scientific session. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for those kind words. Respected Dean, Medical Superintendent, Deputy Medical Superintendent, and Vice Principal of Annapurna Medical College and Hospitals, and my dear delegates, a very good morning to one and all. At this outset, I would like to thank the Professor Pandian and Professor Raja for giving me this opportunity and be a guest speaker in this webinar. It's really a privilege to be a part of this webinar. Now, the topic which is given to me is, just a moment, I'll share the screen. Yes, the topic given to me is perioperative fluid management. As rightly said, perioperative fluid management is an important aspect when it comes to management of any surgical patient. It's not only important for the anesthesiologist, but also for surgeons, as well as the other physicians and nurses who are involved in the management of surgical patients. With these few words, I'll be covering this topic for the next 40 minutes under the following headings. First, I'll be talking about the effect of anesthesia and the fluid balance of a patient who's undergoing a surgery, and what is the need for fluid optimization during the perioperative period, followed by different ways through which we can optimize fluid therapy when a patient undergoes surgery, and a little about goal-directed therapy, which is the recent advance and recent practice in major surgeries, and followed by recent advances which is happening in perioperative fluid management. So, perioperative fluid management is a key component in the management of any surgical patient. But I hope most of you will agree with me that there exists wide disparity in practice between clinicians. Different anesthesiologists give different amount of fluids when same patient is encountered for same surgery. And historically, patients receive large amounts of intravenous fluids thinking that it is going to be beneficial for the patient in the perioperative period. But that's not the case. We need to optimize the perioperative fluid management, which is going to play a critical part in the overall outcome of any surgical patient. And of late, recently, a lot of major advances happened in this field, and it is very important for us to understand to effectively administer fluid during perioperative period. Now, the simple question which comes to our mind is that what is the need for fluid during perioperative period? We all know surgeons do procedures under local anesthesia, but when a procedure is performed under general anesthesia, we are supposed to give fluids, whereas when a procedure is performed under local anesthesia, majority of the surgeons don't prefer to administer IV fluids. So what is the need? The first thing is, before operation, we need to prepare a patient body for surgery. For anesthesia, we keep the patient nil oral for a certain period of time. So the patient is likely to be dehydrated during that period. So we have to prepare the patient for surgery. Second, during operation, there is significant change in blood pressure and oxygen delivery takes place, either because of anesthesia itself or because of surgery. So this needs to be addressed by administering IV fluids. And in the postoperative period also, for a smooth recovery and early recovery to the and hospital discharge, we need to administer good amount of fluids for a smooth recovery. So this shows the importance of fluid management in the perioperative period. Now that we have understood that anesthesia plays a major role in the fluid balance of patients undergoing surgery, let's see how anesthesia affects it. When you give anesthesia to any patient, whether it is a regional or a general anesthesia, what happens is it mainly depresses the central nervous system. Along with it, it also depresses the cardiovascular system, which eventually leads to decrease in blood pressure and cardiac output. What happens because of that? There is decreased oxygen delivery to majority of the vital organs, which can lead to organ dysfunction also. This effect particularly depends upon the extent and duration of surgery as well as anesthesia. So what I mean by saying that the longer the duration of the surgery, the likelihood there will be significant fluid shift. Similarly, the prolonged anesthesia can also have significant impact on the fluid shift. So we need to be very careful when you are handling cases which are going for a prolonged period of time. Now, when they studied in the ancient times, when anesthesia was brought into the specialty, they found out that the main cause for fall in blood pressure during anesthesia is because of the third space loss, which is nothing but movement of fluid from intravenous to interstitium. So the logical step is to address this problem by replacing a fluid which is more similar to our blood or our interstitial fluids by doing large IU fluids, by transfusing large IU fluids in the perioperative period. This was the practice for quite some time in the past. This also as a school of thought that we need to maintain a blood pressure which is more similar to the baseline pre-surgical levels also. In order to achieve this also, we need to transfuse some fluids during the perioperative period. But this has changed totally because of recent research and the current evidence. It shows that a normal average patient, who's an ASA1 patient who undergoes a surgery, will not have any third space loss during the surgical procedure. This is a new change. So we need to change our approach also accordingly. Then why there is a fall in blood pressure when you give anesthesia? This fall in blood pressure is mainly because of the effect of anesthetic agents on the venous circulation, which leads to venous dilatation and pooling of blood into the venous space. So what actually happens? You give anesthesia, either regional or the GA, there is going to be venous dilatation. What the body tries to do, it tries to push all the arterial blood from the arterial circulation to the venous circulation, because of which there is going to be a fall in blood pressure and there is likely that organs will dysfunction, particularly the vital organs. Now, why we need to optimize the fluid? We know that we need to give fluid. What if we give more fluid or what if we give less fluid? If we look into the relationship between fluid load and the perioperative complication, it goes by a classical U-shaped curve, wherein if you are giving less fluid, there is likely chance that the patients will develop hypoperfusion, organ dysfunction, and eventually lead to adverse outcome. Similarly, the other end of the U curve, where you give more number of fluids also, the patients will develop edema, organ dysfunction, and eventually adverse outcome. So it is very, very important to maintain an optimal fluid throughout the perioperative period so that the outcome is better. Now, what are the other reasons why we should achieve this optimization? Aren't we not doing optimized fluid balance, fluid supply during the perioperative period? Yes. Even today, the fluid administration during the perioperative period is more chaotic. Everybody uses their own way of their own formulas, their own way of managing cases. They give different amounts of fluids in different, depending upon the individual patient. And this importance of optimization is because it also improves the pulmonary function in the postoperative period, tissue oxygenation during the intraoperative period, gastrointestinal mobility, and wound healing in the postoperative period. Now that we have understood, we need to optimize the fluid. We cannot give less or more fluid. Then how we are going to achieve it? In order to achieve it, we need to understand all the domains of fluid administration. The first one is assessment of fluid status. First, we need to assess whether a particular patient is fluid deficient or not. That you need to be very particular. If you are fail in assessing this, you may land up in overhydrating or underhydrating a patient. The second step is to decide on what is the volume which needs to be administered. You know that the patient is fluid deficient. You should also exactly calculate how much volume needs to be given to the patient to bring a balance in the fluid. The next question which needs to be addressed is, okay, I'm going to give fluids. What is the fluid? You have an array of fluids available for perioperative use. Which fluid is specifically useful in this particular patient? This we should know. The next thing is what route you are trying to administer. And the last one is the time of administrations. When you are going to administer. Are you going to administer all your fluids in the intraoperative period? Or you are going to divide them in little in the preoperative, little in the postoperative period? All these things becomes very important when you want a good outcome in the perioperative period. Now we'll address each of the domains one by one. I'll start with the assessment of fluid status. So when it comes to assessment, the older ways, the more clinical way of assessing fluid status of a patient is to look into the skin turgor, or to look for the capillary refilling time, or to ask for the urine output to find out what was the urine output. These are to some extent reliable, but they are not very objective. They become more subjective. Now, if you want to assess objectively, the most commonly used variables are the hemodynamic variables, which we routinely monitor during the intraoperative and perioperative period, which includes monitoring heart rate, blood pressure, and central venous pressure. Any change in these things could be because of fluid changes. And we have some other monitors also, like echocardiography, which is now become standard of care when you want to assess the fluid status of any patient, and some advanced monitors like cardiac output monitors. So as I said, hemodynamic variable is the most commonly used tool in the perioperative period. We all anesthetists use heart rate, blood pressure as a minimum standard monitors in the perioperative period. But is it a useful tool to assess volume status specifically? No, it has got its own disadvantages. The first one is, when we monitor BP or heart rate and we react according to that, it is more of a reactive intervention rather than a proactive intervention. What I mean by reactive is, when we monitor blood pressure and some fluid loss happens, we wait for the BP to fall and then we intervene, transfuse fluids, and then bring the BP back. By then, there is likely chance that some amount of organ dysfunction or damage would have already occurred. So monitoring blood pressure or heart rate is a sort of reactive intervention rather than a proactive intervention. Moreover, these variables are also influenced by other factors, like if, let's say, if a patient is having rise in heart rate, could be because of pain or could be because of lighter plane of anesthesia, and need not be because of the fluid shifts, which is happening during the intraoperative period. And both our general as well as thoracic anesthesia causes perioperative hypotension. Majority of the time, it is due to the decreased vascular tone and not because of the shift of the fluid from the intravenous to the third space. So all these things makes this monitoring blood pressure and heart rate not that specific to come to a conclusion about volume status of a patient. So we are left with some advanced monitors like echocardiography. It could be a useful bedside tool for the assessment of fluid status in the perioperative period. By using echocardiography, we can measure preload, contractility, and afterload of any patient. When it comes to fluid status of patient, the best measurement will be the measurement of IVC diameter, where we can see the diameter, the collapsibility, which will roughly give an idea about what is the fluid status of the patient. And you can assess your post-transfusion also whether significant improvement has happened or not. This can be very well monitored through the echocardiography. But this cannot be used in the intraoperative period due to obvious reasons like surgeons and patients will be draped. So mostly it will be used in the peri-pre or in the post-operative period. Now the other monitors are like cardiac output monitors. It will be used only in advanced surgeries and when only in tertiary centers, advanced centers, when very complex patients you handle, which maybe you can use something like pulmonary artery catheter, esophageal Dopplers, or techniques which uses pulse contour analysis. There are various devices available. I don't want to go into detail of this, but we should be aware that if you want to specifically know about the volume status, we can use these cardiac output monitors also, and they can be of great help to know about the volume status. Now that we have understood how to assess a patient, let's say you have assessed a particular patient and you have found out that the patient is volume deficient. Our next step is to know how much volume I'm going to give to this patient. We'll move to this aspect, this domain of fluid management. So, as I said earlier, rightly said by your chairperson also, that there exists a wide variation in fluid management, both within and between anesthesia providers. What I mean is the same, in the same institute, different anesthesiologists use varying amounts of fluid for a same procedure. So patients were either given restricted fluids or more liberal fluids. Let's say a 75 kg patient who is undergoing a 4-hour procedure with a minimal blood loss can either receive 700 ml or 3000 ml of fluid depending upon the specific anesthesia provider. So there is a huge difference of the amount of fluid which is being given to a patient. I hope most of my anesthesia colleagues will agree with it. The goal of any to identify how much volume needs to be given is we should try to achieve euvolemia. You should not try to achieve hypervolemia while also try to avoid hypotension. So this is little tricky and we need to balance both the things simultaneously. Now, which is better? Whether we should use restrictive fluid or liberal fluid. It is a never-ending debate. Ever since anesthesia is there, people are discussing about whether to use liberal or whether to use restrict. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. Many studies were also planned and conducted, which were done in different surgical populations and by using different definitions. They used a different definition for what they mean by restrictive and what they mean by liberal. Because of these reasons, the results of these studies were mostly conflicting and they are not able to come out with any definitive answers that which one is better for overall outcome. But one thing is very clear, that a positive fluid balance has been shown to be associated with increased morbidity and mortality. Why so? Why liberal? When we use liberal fluid during challenge also. Now, what we call by fluid response is typically defined by increase in stroke volume by 10% or more following a fluid challenge. Not only stroke volume, we do have other predictors like pulse pressure variation, vena cava collapsibility index, dynamic passive leg raising test, and end occlusion expiratory test. All these predictors can be used to find out whether a patient is responding to your fluid or not, and accordingly you can take a call on further fluid administration. The type of fluid, the volume, and the rate at which the fluid needs to be administered also varies for fluid challenge also. There is no clear-cut definition, this much fluid should be given over this much period to find out this much response. There are varying definitions and guidelines on how to go about fluid challenge also, depending upon individual patient. So we have finished now that how to assess a patient and how to find out the volume which needs to be given. Now the next question which comes to our mind is, what should be the choice of fluid? We have a lot different kinds of fluids available which can be used in the perioperative period. The type of fluid makes a major impact in the overall outcome of the patient. We have two major families of fluids, which are crystalloids and colloids. This table shows the composition of crystalloids. Most commonly used crystalloids are normal saline, ringer lactate, and plasmolite. Colloids are hydroxyethyl star, gelatin, and albumin. They have varying composition. They differ in their osmolarity and they differ in their lactate component composition also. Now, crystalloids are the salt solutions which easily diffuses from intravascular to interstitium compartment. They are the most commonly used fluids in the perioperative period. Among them, you can divide them as balanced solution and normal saline. Among balanced solution, this can be either Hartmann solution, which is nothing but a ringer lactate, or plasmolite. Balanced solution is the one which is most commonly used because it is more physiological and that is why it is mostly preferred by most of the anesthesiologists. I said among the balance solution also, there is no clear data on which one is better, whether linger lactate or plasmolite. It depends upon the buffer which they have, whether they have lactate or acetate. But in a majority of centers, we use linger lactate as a common balance solution during perioperative period. Now, why not normal saline? What will happen if you use normal saline as a common intravenous fluid? Normal saline contains 0.9% saline, which consists of around 154 millimoles of chloride, which is significantly higher than what is present in our blood. So because of normal saline, there is leads to hyperchloremic acidosis, renal vasoconstriction, and acute kidney injury. But when you use balanced crystalloid, the risk of kidney injury is very minimal. That is why we don't prefer to use normal saline. In general, we use ringer lactate as the most common fluid for perioperative fluid management. How about colloids? Colloids, we all know that these are larger molecules than crystalloids, and they stay in the circulation for longer than crystalloids. The volume sparing effect between colloid and crystalloid is around 1:1.3. Most commonly used colloids are dextrans, hydroxyethyl starch ester, gelatins, and albumins. Hydroxyethyl starch is one of the commonly used colloids. These are synthetic colloids mainly used for fluid resuscitation. When you want to aggressively replace the intravascular volume, we can consider using hydroxyethyl starch. But there is significant risk of acute kidney injury when you use more of esters for your routine replacement. Sorry. The next one is gelatins. Gelatins are macromolecules which are derived from bovine collagen. If we use gelatins, we found that there is increased risk of impaired clot formation, as well as they are known to produce anaphylactic reactions in some patients. So it is better to avoid gelatins when you want to replace intravascular volume. The last one is in albumin. Albumin is nothing but it's harvested from a healthy human donors and treated to prevent pathogen transmission. The advantage of using albumin is that its colloid osmotic pressure is maintained when you transfuse albumin to any patient, and it also preserves renal function, and it also got a very good safety record. But the only problem with albumin is that it is very expensive, so we cannot use it routinely for any patient who is coming for surgery. But for specific indications in patients who are in sepsis or patients undergoing major hepatic surgeries, albumin do have some role, and they can be beneficial compared to other colloids and crystalloids. Now, which route is better? We know that we have to give fluids. We know how to calculate the volume. We know which fluid is better. Now we'll see which route is best. It is very obvious that intraoperatively we can use only the intravenous route, and that is the most common route also. But one should also understand that whatever fluid we are infusing through intravenous route need not stay within the intravascular compartment. In specific patients where those who have leaky capillaries, whatever fluid you are infusing may immediately get transferred to the interstitial space and may land up in edema. So we should be very careful when you are using intravenous route for massive fluid transfusion. Oral, yes, of course, this can be used not in the either in the preoperative period or in the postoperative period. Either this can be through oral intake or through a nasogastric tube. This will have a significant benefits in the recovery of a patient. I'll come to that when I talk about postoperative fluid management in the latter part of my talk. Now, moving on to time of administration. Now, this is one of the important domain which we all should understand. We know that this patient needs fluid. We know how much to be given. We know what fluid to be given, but when to give these fluids. We have three timings, that is time points. One is preoperative period, other is intraoperative period, and postoperative period. Let's see what are the advantages and when we should give how much fluid and so on. Historically, the focus has been more on the intraoperative management. Most of the time, even the olden days and even currently also, the IV line is secured only on table, and most of the fluids are given in the intraoperative period only. But recently, after so many research, the focus is getting shifted to more on the preoperative fluid as well as postoperative fluid management. That is why even today's topic is not about intraoperative fluid management. It's all about perioperative fluid management, where everything needs to be given importance, starting from preoperative period, intraoperative period and postoperative period, and we should divide the fluids in such a way that they are given in each of those periods. Now, coming to preoperative fluid management, when it comes to preoperative fluid management, the American Society of Anesthesiologists has put forward certain guidelines for fasting whenever any patient is scheduled to undergo anesthesia or surgery. So they said clear fluids can be given up to 2 hours prior to surgery, and breast milk up to 4 hours, whereas meals and fried foods can be given up to 6 to 8 hours. What they mean by clear fluid is water, fresh juices without pulp, carbonated beverages, clear tea, and black coffee. Any of these fluids can be given just 2 hours prior to surgery. This is what the guidelines recommend. Now, why should we give fluid at this point of time, that is during the preoperative period? Because the patient is likely to be dehydrated even before elective surgeries. Why? They are maybe we usually keep them overnight fasting. They'll be fasting for more than 12 hours. And sometimes for colonic surgeries and all, we'll do mechanical bowel preparation, which will lead to significant fluid losses just before the surgery. So when you add anesthesia in an already compromised patient, the patient is likely to develop complication during intra and perioperative, postoperative period. So the current guidelines suggest that you should not only advise patients to take fluid up to 2 hours before surgery, you should actually promote to take clear fluids up to 2 hours before surgery. It's like encouraging the patient to take fluid so that their fluid hemostasis is maintained. And they also recommend that mechanical bowel preparation can be avoided in colonic surgeries. Of course, it depends upon the concerned surgeon. If he agrees, we can avoid doing mechanical preparation also. What are the advantages? Other than maintaining an hemostasis, it maintains a metabolism in a anabolic state rather than a starved catabolic state. It decreases insulin resistance. It reduces anxiety of the patient. Sometimes thirsty, starved patient will be very anxious. They'll be feeling uncomfortable. So that can be avoided. And it was actually found by research that if you give some amount of fluids just 2 hours before surgery, it actually reduces the incidence of nausea and vomiting in the postoperative period also. Now, coming to intraoperative fluid management, as I said, it's very important that among the 3 time points, intraoperative fluid management is very important. Sorry. Yes. So intraoperative fluid management depends on various factors. Let's say it depends upon the age. If you come across a pediatric patient, your management is going to be totally different compared to an adult patient. Similarly, the type of surgery, whether the patient undergoes cardiac, neuro, or abdominal surgery, the fluid management is totally different. And the presentation of the patient. If a patient is presenting for an elective surgery or an emergency surgery, the fluid requirement and the fluid hemostasis is going to be totally different. And also the comorbidities. That is a patient with a diabetes, patient with valvular heart disease, patient with renal failure. We may not be using a standard fluid for all these patients. I will not be discuss about individual patients or individual scenarios because this is where the expertise of the anesthesiologist comes into picture. And these topics by itself is a topic and it's beyond the scope of this particular topic. So now we know that every patient is a different patient, every pathology is a different pathology. So it becomes very challenging to estimate the fluid requirement, particularly the perioperative fluid loss in a particular patient and how to replace it. So while calculating how much fluid I'm going to give during intraoperative period, I should consider some of the factors like how long the patient has been fasting, what is the surgical time, whether the surgery is going to be over in 1 hour or 10 hours. What is the likely surgical blood loss or fluid loss? Is it going to be in 200 ml or 2 liters? How the insensible fluid loss is going to be? Let's say for the abdominal surgeries, the insensible loss is going to be more compared to a closed space surgeries. Accordingly, I have to do a lot of calculations and plan my fluid therapy during the perioperative period. And as you all know, this involves significant assumptions and likely that every anesthesiologist can err while calculating these complex mechanisms, how to decide on the volume of fluid which needs to be given in the perioperative period. Though it's very complex, we follow a standard calculation method when it comes to any elective surgery. where we calculate the hourly maintenance using a formula called Holiday-Siccar formula, which goes by the formula ratio of 4:2:1, where for the initial 10 kg, we use 4 ml per kg per hour, and the next 10 kg, we use 2 ml per kg per hour, and later on, for every 10 kg, we use 1 ml per kg per hour. Like this, we calculate the maintenance fluid needed for a particular surgery. We also calculate the deficit, which is there because of the fasting. How we calculate? Similar to maintenance, we calculate maintenance, and then we multiply it by the hours of fasting. We get the total deficit of the patient. Are we going to replace every deficit, all the deficit in one go? No. 50% of the deficit will be replaced in the first hour, and 25% in the second hour, and another 25% in the third hour. This is how we replace the deficit in the intraoperative period. There are also other losses like third space loss, which can vary from 2 ml per kg per hour for a minor procedure to 10 ml per kg per hour for an abdominal surgeries. And there will also be a blood loss, which also needs to be replaced by a ratio of 1:1 if you are giving colloids, by a ratio of 3:1 if you are giving crystalloids. Now, I'll give an example where a 70 kg patient is undergoing gastrectomy after fasting for 8 hours. So if you calculate the maintenance rate, it will be around 110 ml per hour. The overall deficit for the 8 hours comes to 880 ml per hour. How we are going to manage the intraoperative period? In the first hour, we'll be giving off of the deficit, maintenance, whatever loss which is going to happen, and the third space loss. We'll add all of those. Along with that, there is something called CVE, that is compensatory volume expansion. As I said in the beginning, anesthesia leads to venous dilatation and some amount of fluid get accumulated in the venous compartment. To compensate for that, we need to give some extra fluid. That comes to around 5 ml per kg per hour. So that is how we calculate for the first hour. When it comes to second hour and third hour, the compensatory volume expansion goes off. The deficit, we transfute only 1/4 of the deficit, rest all remains the same. Similarly, for the third hour also, we transfuse the same way. Now, this is the standard calculation, but there is a different mechanism by which we can be more specific and more clear about how much fluid needs to be transfused for a particular patient. This goes by the recent terminology called goal-directed therapy, where we plan our fluid therapy based on certain monitoring, particularly the cardiovascular monitors like stroke volume, cardiac output, oxygen delivery, blood pressure, and urine output of a particular patient. Why we should do a goal-directed therapy? This is mainly to avoid giving excess fluid in the intraoperative period, as well as to prevent hypotension. Here they don't not only give fluids, they also add little bit inotropes, because they understand that it's not because of fluids all the hypotension is happening. Some amount of hypotension is because of the venodilatation and because of the depressive effects on the heart. So we need to add little inotropes to maintain the blood pressure. The current recommendation suggests that every single patient should have an individualized plan. There is no standard protocol. There is no standard fluid management. Every patient is a different patient, depending upon the pathology, depending upon the presentation. We should have a fluid management plan for that particular patient and for that surgical risk. This is an algorithm which shows how we go by doing the goal-directed therapy. This can be practiced only in major surgeries where we place all advanced monitors. Like we start with the stroke volume variation. We try to find out through our cardiac monitors whether it is more than 10% or less than 10%. If it is more than 10%, it's very clear that the patient is hypovolemic and we give fluids to the patient. If it is less than 10%, we measure the mean arterial blood pressure. If it is greater than 60 millimeter of mercury, we don't do anything. If it is less than 60 millimeter of mercury, we go and find out the cardiac index. Yes, cardiac index is again can be monitored from the, can be measured from the cardiac output monitors. But if it is less than 2.5 liters per minute, that means the cardiac contractility is less. We need to add inotrope to the patient. If it is more than 2.5 liters per minute, it means that the vascular tone is less. We need to add vasoconstrictor to the patient. This is how we manage majority of the major surgeries, which are usually prolonged procedures and involves major fluid shift. We go by measuring the stroke volume, their BP and cardiac index, and we use either fluids, inotropes, or vasoconstrictors depending upon these monitors. Of course, this is not needed for most of the simple procedures. They can be very well managed with our conventional blood pressure monitoring and heart rate monitoring. Now moving on to post-operative fluid management. Like as I said, intravenous fluid therapy should be kept at very minimum in the post-operative period, because it was found that by various studies, if the intravenous fluid is kept minimum in the post-operative period, there is improved pulmonary function, improved tissue oxygenation, and gastrointestinal motility, and there is also good wound healing. So as primary care physicians, we should try to move on to oral hydration as early as possible to facilitate early healing and recovery. Urine output should not be the driving force to give fluid in the post-operative period also. It is a general tendency that we, in the post-operative, we ask what is the urine output. If it is less, give some 500 ml fluid, 1000 ml fluid. That should not be the case. Some amount of oliguria is normal in the post-operative period. It is because of the release of vasopressin in response to the stress of the surgery. So we should not try to overreact by, even for a minimal oliguria, try to give more fluids, and it will eventually lead to organ destruction or edema to the patient. So we should try to keep a threshold of around 0.3 ml per kg per hour if for any intervention to do in the direction of fluid administration. Now I'll briefly talk about one of the recent advances which is happening when it comes to perioperative fluid management, that is multimodal monitoring technology. This is in research mode till, where they monitor certain parameters simultaneously, like blood flow to a particular tissue, depth of anesthesia, tissue oxygenation. These three parameters are monitored simultaneously. As we know already, we have seen that depth of anesthesia plays a major role in bringing down the hypotension, bringing down the blood pressure. So by monitoring all these things together, we can micromanage the effect of anesthetic drugs. We can titrate your anesthetic doses, whether it is inhalation agents or intravenous agent. We can titrate so that they don't cause significant impact on the blood pressure as well as the fluid compartment. By doing this monitoring, we can also do precise and limited amounts of fluids can also be given to the patient. By that way, we can avoid fluid overload while maintaining blood pressure and oxygen delivery. So take-home message is that fluid administration is standard of care whenever any procedure is done under anesthesia. There is no doubt about it. We need to be expert about how to give fluids to patients who are undergoing surgery under anesthesia. And fluid should be considered as medication, not a pathway to give medication. They themselves are medications. So they should be very cautiously used in the perioperative period. And we should have a plan to accurately calculate and dose fluids in the perioperative period. And they should also be titrated to desired effect. If you have the monitors and you can fix a effect, how much I want the cardiac output to be, how much I want the stroke volume variation to be, accordingly, we can titrate the fluids also. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be very happy to answer if there are any questions.
Any questions? Satish?
As chairperson, Dr. Pandian, sir, too.
Yes.
Vinayam sir, given a good topic, good speak about the pre-operative, post-operative management. Thank you very much for that. Any questions with the
From
audience?
the participants, any questions you can raise?
No questions, sir. You had understood fully. Understood. Any questions from anybody? Some questions.
Sir, there is a question from Dr. Kadivelu.
Yes, Dr. Kadivelu asked one question.
What is the role of CVP in major surgery?
Yes, CEP has got a bigger role to play in major surgeries, because after whenever we feel that your blood pressure and heart rate are not going to be a reliable indicator of fluid status, we plan to place a central line and we used to measure CVP. Provided the patient doesn't have any cardiac diseases, they can be a very good indicator for to plan or to assess the fluid status also, as well as to further plan your fluid administration. You can keep monitoring, like it's like anytime you give fluid, further you can see the change in the CVP, and it can be a very helpful tool. Yes, there's no doubt about it.
So pulmonary capillary wedge pressure and arterial pressure will have collaborative management.
Yes. Yes, sir. Actually, pulmonary artery catheter is not currently preferred technique of measuring cardiac output monitors because of various complications, because of wedging and other issues. They don't get properly wedged. The technique itself is very cumbersome, and patient develop a lot of complication. So we don't prefer nowadays. We don't prefer such an intravenous interventional technique to measure cardiac output. We prefer more of a non-invasive measurement of cardiac output. Like I have mentioned some of them, like FlowTrack, LiDCO, and so on, sir. We can have any of those to non-invasively measure cardiac output, sir. If you ask me personally, to assess the fluid status, there is no need to place a pulmonary artery catheter and wedge and find out cardiac output. This will do more harm than helping you in managing the intraoperative periods.
Buds. There's a question from Vinesh. If cardiac patient undergoes surgery, what to monitor, sir?
Sorry, I'm not able to get the question.
If a cardiac patient undergoes surgery, what to monitor?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, as I said, this is where the expertise of the anesthesiologist comes into picture. Like it depends upon what is the cardiac index of the patient, like how severe is the cardiac disease. So depending upon that and what type of surgery the patient undergoes, depending upon that we decide on the monitoring devices. Like if the cardiac disease is very minimal and the surgery is also a very low risk surgery, we don't prefer to go for any advanced monitoring devices like IBP or cardiac output monitors. But yes, if it's a severe heart disease where the ejection fraction is very low and the surgery is also a high-risk procedure which involves major blood loss or fluid shift, we go for many invasive invasive monitoring devices like IBP and CVP, which are routinely used. Nowadays, we use more of TEs, transesophageal echocardiography, to get a real-time idea about the cardiac status and so on. And if you have the facility to measure the cardiac output by non-invasive technique, yes, that also can be considered.
We use ABG while doing measures in the ABG, blood gas analysis, to see whether electrolyte imbalance and monitor the fluid balance.
Yes. Yes, sir. ABG, yes, it definitely helps. But as I said, this will be of more reactive rather than proactive. Like by the time you come to know your fluid status affecting a blood gas of a patient, it will be too late. Like because of your hypoperfusion and because of your tissue hypoxia, there will be significant acidosis. And to find out from an ABG and then reacting it, you would have lost by the time lot of time. And maybe the organ damage would have already occurred. It would have been a non-reversible state. So if you ask me, I won't advise ABG as a monitor to assess fluid status of a patient. Of course, this will give an idea about it, but it'll be too late, sir. We are in an era where we want to avoid such complications. We want to avoid such hypotension, or before such fluid shifts happen, we want to intervene and prevent such fluid shift. So in current era, ABG as an indicator of hypoperfusion or this thing is not there, sir. Like it's not a good indicator.
So there's one more question. Any advantage of using isolate solutions?
Any advantage of
using isolate solutions?
Sorry, I'm not able.
Any advantage of using isolate solutions?
Isolate. I don't think as of now there is no advantage. There is some studies which showed that isolates are helpful in neurosurgical patients and to some extent in critical care ICU management. As far as perioperative management is concerned, there is no specific advantage of isolate solutions compared to conventional balanced salt solutions like Ringer lactate, this thing. So, still we get definitive data on the advantage over other fluids, I won't recommend isolate as a routine perioperative fluid. So, yes.
Thank you.
What is an ideal fluid you use perioperatively? Ringer lactate or some other electrolyte container?
Yes, sir. Like we use, if it is a standard patient, like without any comorbidities, we routinely use Ringer lactate as a standard intravenous fluid, sir, for all patients. Until unless if the patient has some other comorbidities like diabetes or patients with other diseases like renal failure or some other conditions, we try to change our plan. Otherwise, routinely we use Ringer lactate in our institute, sir, for intravenous, for perioperative fluid.
Any other questions?
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon all. I thank our HOD Professor Dr. Pondian for giving me this opportunity to propose vote of thanks on behalf of our department. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our chief guest, Dr. Stalin Vinayagam, who has readily accepted our invitation amid his busy schedule and has given an excellent presentation on perioperative fluid management. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
A special thanks to our Honorable Chairman, Mr. J. Satish Kumar, sir, who has been the driving force behind all our endeavors, and especially during this pandemic period, for conducting this CME programs as a series of webinars. I would like to thank our Dean, Professor Dr. Shanmugam, for presiding over this function, and I would like to thank our dignitaries, Medical Superintendent Dr. Mohan, sir, and Deputy Medical Superintendent Professor Dr. Prasanna Babu, sir, and Vice Principal Professor Dr. Usha Madam for their constant support. I would like to thank all HODs, faculties, resident doctors and CRRAs